The title of this message is called, Is the Resurrection of Jesus Authentic? And because of that, I'm wearing my Jesus shirt. Okay, so it's already been proven. The Bible is accurate and reliable. And because the authors and the manuscripts have been proven to be reliable, we can believe with certainty that Jesus died as historically documented. However, the resurrection of Christ in flesh is of such importance to the Christian faith that the New Testament insists no one can be saved without it. And you can find that in Romans 10, verse 9, 1 Corinthians 15, verses 1 to 7. Without the resurrection, there is no Christianity. But is there any evidence that would suggest that the resurrection truly happened? Well, a powerful and unmistakable sign of the authenticity of Jesus' resurrection can actually be found in the moment of first discovery. Jesus first appeared to a woman, Mary Magdalene. We see that in John 20, verses 11 to 18. Now ponder on the implications of this. It is safe to say that in the first century Jewish culture, a writer attempting to invent a resurrection account would never have taken this approach. In a male-dominated culture, a woman's testimony was not even accepted in court. In contrast, a conjured story attempting to gain credibility would most likely choose a major disciple as the first witness, not a woman such as Mary Magdalene nonetheless. Not only was Mary a woman, but she had been demon-possessed. In fact, it is written that Jesus had cast out 7 demons from her. You can find that in Luke 8:2. So if a writer had been trying to conjure up a story with credibility, Mary would have been the last person someone would have chosen to use as the first witness of the resurrection. In Acts 1, verse 3, it is written that Jesus appeared to his disciples over a period of 40 days. Now, it would have been quite easy to debunk the resurrection of Jesus within a 40-day span time, right? Instead, the 40 days only solidified the faith of many. The one everyone calls Doubting Thomas. Well, they call him that for a reason. Because Thomas refused to believe that Jesus came back from the dead unless he could see and touch Jesus for himself. A week later, Thomas's needs were met. In John 20, verses 27 to 28, Jesus showed himself to Thomas and told him, "Put your finger here, see my hands, put out your hand, place it in my side. Don't disbelieve, believe." To this unquestionably convincing display of physical evidence, Thomas replied, "My Lord and my God." So, no one should call the disciple Doubting Thomas because he was most certainly a believer. In Luke 24, verse 39, Jesus said, "See my hands and my feet. It is I, myself. Touch me and see, for a spirit does not have flesh and bones, as you see that I have." The fact that Jesus had these physical wounds from his crucifixion is an unmistakable proof that he was resurrected in the material body in which he had been crucified. Now, if Jesus had appeared only to those who were believers, or who had a propensity to believe, now there might be some legitimacy to the charge that the witnesses were prejudiced. But the opposite is true. The opposite is actually the case here. In 1 Corinthians 15:6, Paul wrote that Jesus appeared to more than 500 men at one time. Moreover, Paul wrote that most of those witnesses were still alive at that time. Paul wrote in 55 AD, around there. Only 22 years after the resurrection. 22. Paul challenged his readers to investigate what he was saying with this multitude of witnesses who saw and most likely heard Christ after his resurrection. He called them out on it. Witnesses are still alive. Go check it out. 500 men, same time. It's not just me. John 7 verse 5 tells us that even Jesus' own brothers did not believe that Jesus was the Messiah prior to his crucifixion. Jesus' brothers were unbelievers before the resurrection. But after the resurrection, however, at least James and Jude became believers. James eventually wrote one of the books in the New Testament. So whatever James saw or heard during this resurrection appearance of Christ, it not only converted him, but also made him into one of the most prominent figures in the apostolic church. In fact, the resurrection changed all of the disciples. After Jesus' death, his apostles became scared, skeptical, and then scattered. Yet, only a few weeks later, the very same people who ran and hid in fear, you see that in John 20, verse 19, they became fearless and openly proclaimed the resurrection of Christ, even before the Sanhedrin, who the group responsible for Christ's death. You see that in Acts chapters 4 through 5. The fact that a small band of once fearful disciples became the world's greatest fearless and faithful missionary society is ample testimony of their experience with the risen Lord. Witnesses to the resurrection had nothing to gain personally by their witness to the resurrection. They were persecuted and threatened. Most of the apostles were martyred. They did die for the faith. Yet, they proclaimed the truth of Christ and defended their claims in the face of death. Christ Jesus did suffer the Roman execution, and he was crucified. The death of Christ had been confirmed. Further, Christ's dead body was in the sealed tomb. However, the empty tomb was seen 3 days later. Christ's body was not seen in the tomb, yet grave clothes were seen in the tomb. Now, Jesus' physical body was seen by witnesses. His voice and teachings were heard, and those who doubted even got to touch his physical body. If that's not enough, Jesus also ate with them. Spirits don't consume the food. That's physical body. Further, the reaction of the Jewish authorities is also testimony to the fact of Christ's resurrection. They did not produce the body, nor even organize a search to find the body. Instead of refuting the claims of the resurrection, they decided to retaliate with revenge and fought the disciples who testified they had seen the resurrected Christ. So look, let's sum this up. In summary, right? Throughout the centuries since Christ's death and resurrection, skeptics have proposed explanations as to why the tomb was empty. Yet, in all their efforts, they only affirmed that the tomb was, in fact, empty. But the skeptics have never been able to provide good reason for the empty tomb. Some skeptics have said that Jesus was only unconscious and then later revived. However, as discussed in my other article, did Jesus actually die? This theory quickly falls apart. Jesus would not have survived all the documentation that proves Jesus had died a physical death on a cross. Now, some skeptics say that, okay, the women made a mistake and they went to the wrong tomb. However, Mary Magdalene and Mary, mother of Joseph, saw Jesus placed in the tomb. In addition, Peter and John also went to the same tomb on that Sunday morning. Well, some skeptics say that unknown thieves stole Jesus' body from the tomb. Well, however, the tomb was sealed and guarded by Roman soldiers. In addition, the stone that had been placed in front of the tomb entrance was very large, extremely heavy. Even if the Roman soldiers had fallen asleep on the job, they would have been awakened by the noise of the stone being moved away from the opening. Some skeptics have even gone so far to claim that Jesus' own disciples stole the body of Jesus and hid it. However, the disciples were ready to die for the gospel. Stealing Jesus' body would have been admitting that their faith was meaningless. Some skeptics have said that the religious leaders stole Jesus' body to produce it later. However, if the religious leaders had taken Jesus' body, well, they would have produced it to stop the rumors of his resurrection. In conclusion, all of the accumulated evidence leads us to an important question. If the New Testament writers were so careful to be exceedingly accurate in even the most minor and incidental details, as we find in the book of Acts, wouldn't they have been equally or even more careful in reporting on truly significant events, such as the miracles, teachings, death, and resurrection of Jesus? Unbelievers have had about 2,000 years to disprove the Bible and discount Christianity, to show that it should not be believable. However, in the thousands of years, Christianity still remains the most reasonable of all beliefs. The bodily resurrection of Christ is the crowning proof that Jesus was and is and will be who he claims to be. God manifested in human flesh, God with us, the great I am. But that begs the question, did Jesus claim to be God? Well, that'll have to be the next video.